The views expressed in this show are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, Department of the Navy, or the U.S. government.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Philosophication with Ginger and the Beard. I'm Jason, and I have a beard. Now, for those of you who didn't catch our first episode, I compete in the sport of Strongman. It's a lot of fun. I've been doing it for a couple of years now. But just a couple of weeks ago, the organization I compete in, the Strongman Corporation, came out with a new policy regarding transgendered athletes. So for about the first hour or so, maybe a little over, of this episode, Michael and I have a conversation about that. And afterwards, we get into an interesting little fact about the Constitution that you may or may not know. I think it's maybe a little bit lesser known than a lot of things about the Constitution. So hope you find that interesting and enjoy.
All right. Well, let's talk about transgender people in sports. So this has been a thing, been an issue in sports for a while. But the reason I want to talk about it now is that it has come to my sport. So I don't want to say it affects me personally, because it really doesn't. Because, let's be honest, it's not going to affect the men in Strongman. It's going to affect the women, but we'll get into that. So Strongman Corporation is the major organization for strongman in America, one of two, but it's the one I compete in. And so they just came out with a policy on transgendered athletes that is it's more or less the same one that the International Olympic Committee has. And so the first big issue with this is that I think, regardless of your opinion of transgendered people or any of that stuff, I think that this policy does not do what its purpose is. It doesn't accomplish its purpose. So
what is the policy and what's its purpose?
Yeah. So, well, I'll get into that, but first I want to ask you, if you were going to craft a policy in a sport for transgender people, put yourself in the shoes of a person who wants to be as inclusive as possible. And what do you think the purpose of a policy would be? Like, what would you want to accomplish with a policy on transgendered athletes?
If hypothetically I,
pretend you
cared about this inclusion stuff.
Yeah, just pretend you want to be inclusive.
Okay. Well, I think that it seems to me you want them to be able to compete, but you want things to be fair. And how you can do both is a tough one. I think, I don't know, maybe a third and fourth gender division might work. I mean, we separate men and women.
Yeah. So I'm not asking you to tell me what policy you would put in place, just what the goal of it would be. So you said include transgender people and also keep it fair for women, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I think most of these policies are intended to do. But I would argue that this policy accomplishes the first thing, but not the second. And I don't think you can argue that. I certainly haven't heard anyone convincingly argue that. So let's talk about what the policy is. It's basically, like I said, it's basically the same one that the Olympic Committee has now. And so in order to talk about that, the reason that men and women, or one of the reasons that men and women are unequal in contests of physical strength, is testosterone, right? Testosterone contributes to greater muscle mass and greater bone density. Those are the big ones that make a difference in physical contests. So normal male levels of testosterone, I think, are like 200 to 1200 nanograms per deciliter, if I remember right. So what this policy does is it says that, first of all, it doesn't put any restrictions on female to male transgenders. Like, female to male can compete, women can compete with the men, no issues there, which makes sense. But for male to female, in order to compete in the women's division, a male to female transgender has to be on hormone therapy, and they have to get their testosterone down to 10 nanograms per deciliter for at least 1 year prior to competing in the women's division. So they have to get it down there, maintain it for a year, and then they have to maintain that level for the whole time they're competing as a woman. And they can only switch. This was a weird part of this. They can switch genders once every 4 years.
That's a funny thought.
I thought that was weird. Like once you switch, once you go to the women's division, you have to stay there for 4 years if you want to keep competing. Right. I thought that was weird, but anyway, so that's pretty much the policy. And so this is the first thing that I want to talk about is I don't see how you can argue convincingly that this makes the competition fair for women, because the purpose of the hormone restriction is to try to make it fair for the women, because you have a grown man going to compete in the women's division. If there were no restrictions on testosterone, then he would just destroy everyone. So they make him get their testosterone down to try to make it fair for the women, only it doesn't do that. So think about if I'm a 25-year-old man. If I were to decide that I want to go compete as a woman and I get my testosterone levels down to 10, and next year I decide to compete as a woman, the fact that I got my testosterone down that low now doesn't erase the 25 years of male testosterone levels that I had. Right. Like all of that, I had 25 years to build muscle and bone density and grow with the benefit of male testosterone levels. And all that doesn't just go away because I got my testosterone levels way down now. So I just don't see it. Like, I guess, I mean, I'm open to being convinced if somebody wants to try to convince me that this actually does make the competition fair for women, but I don't see how that's debatable. So that's the first part of this. The other part, I mean, nobody, the thing is though, that nobody tries to argue that, or at least from what I've seen, like nobody wants to debate that point. They just want to debate the social aspects of it and like the culture war aspects of it, which we can get into. But do you have any thoughts on the that fact, or what I think is the fact of the matter? Yeah. First.
Yeah, it's a really weird one, because normally we talk about it in the past. You see it with like when Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris talk to each other. But I, even trying as honestly and in good faith as I can, I cannot think of a steel man for this argument. I can't do it. Like, you could, unless the social justice part is the only part that matters. If the fairness part doesn't matter, I can't even steel man. I cannot put myself in their shoes and think of any reasonable way that this is fair. I can reasonably think in their shoes that it's still worth it, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I would think. That's what I would think it would be about. Like, right. You could argue, like, the fact that I don't think is debatable is that this does not make things fair for women. Right. And you could talk about whether it's worth it to have things unfair for women, but yeah, go ahead.
So I think a big issue with that, with those criteria, are the idea that the only reason men are bigger and stronger than women is testosterone. Like, that's not true. Like, I don't know. if you were just naturally going to be small, right? Like some people are just like that. They have little frames. They might be able to pack on some muscle and be pretty tough, but genetics has a lot to do, even among men, from one man to another, how much muscle you can put on, how strong you are. It's not all based on how much testosterone you have, you know. And women and men are physiologically different in more ways than just chemicals that float around in their bloodstream. Their muscular skeletal system is actually different. You can, like, archaeologists can look at a skeleton and know that it's a woman. Like, we are different. And the idea that a woman can just, first of all, a woman jacking up her testosterone is still going to be at a disadvantage. Now, granted, that woman, even a woman without testosterone, so a strong woman competitor who's at the top of her game is stronger than a lot of men. You know what I mean? Because most men don't compete in strongman, but that's because they're doing strongman. You know what I mean? They're getting strong. They're getting freaky strong because they work at it, and most men aren't doing that, right? But among peers,
actually, on that note, I was just looking this up the other day for some reason, but like the world record deadlift for women is somewhere right around 600 pounds. That's raw. Like, if any, I'm pretty sure it was a raw deadlift, but it's somewhere around 600 pounds,
for example.
But to put that in perspective, my deadlift personal record is 615. So,
and you're kind of,
and like, I'm a noob. I am nowhere near the top men in the sport, and the top men in the sport are routinely deadlifting over 900.
Right.
And like the world record is, north of 1,100 pounds.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not even the same. They're in completely different leagues. Like, I deadlift more than the women's world record.
Yeah.
It's just not. So, and you're right. Testosterone is not the only reason. It is a big part of the reason, but it's not the only reason. And to think that
true that you build this strength and muscle over years and years and years,
right?
And for I bet most of the men who become women and compete in strong woman, do they call it strong woman?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay,
I don't know.
whatever.
Sometimes people just call it strongman, but
okay,
sometimes people say strong
female strongman. Anyway, so if I think most of the men who do this are going to be men who already were strongmen. Like, it's not going to be some 18-year-old who spent, I mean, this will maybe eventually happen. Some 18-year-old who has spent years, his entire teenage, life living as a woman and with hormones and all that crap and very low testosterone. And then decides, you know what, I want to be a beefy motherfucker. Like, some guy who wanted to be a woman then decides, you know what, I want to be a big jacked fucking woman, right? So anyway, that's contradictory in my mind to want to do that, but because you already have such a natural advantage. If you want to be a beast, then just don't become a woman, or wear a wig and keep your testosterone, and whatever, or grow your hair out, whatever. But so you're right about the testosterone. If you went down for a year and then competed, you'd be at a big advantage. You would lose a step for sure.
Yeah, I'll probably lose a little strength from where I'm at now, but I'm still going to be substantially stronger than the average strong woman competitor.
Exactly. So I think the whole fairness thing, it seems obvious that a strong man switching over and becoming a strong woman is going to have a huge advantage.
Yeah, I don't see how you can even argue that.
You might argue the example I gave, where like a total noob, like 18, 20-year-old who's been living his whole life as a woman and wants to compete in strong woman and joins the sport as a woman, right? And has already had never grew a bunch of muscle as a man, and got huge just starting from scratch. I still think that given time that person will be very strong in the women's division just because. Now, but it's maybe that's not super fair either, because not every man, not just any man, can become a strongman competitor and be all that strong. But There's certainly very weak, small men who could try and get a lot stronger, but maybe be weaker than some of the maybe above average women. But anyway, yeah. So I think when I try and think of the fairness piece, I've never understood this, and I really want to. I try. I always want to. It's easy to make fun of the other side, and that that's a good time. But I genuinely want to understand I want to hear their best possible solid argument. You know what I mean? And I can't even do that. I can't put myself in their shoes and make a solid argument for fairness. It's not fair. And the only evidence you need that it's not fair is every time this happens, the men obliterate the women, right?
Yeah, there was just it was the Commonwealth Games. It's like an Olympic style event in Australia. There was a transgender, male to female transgender person. I don't even know whether to call it a man or a woman. I guess you call it a woman. That's like the politically correct term. But male to female transgender person competed in the Commonwealth Games and just destroyed everyone.
Yeah.
Didn't
he break records?
Yeah.
Yeah. Broke records. Yeah. It's like, of course. And then there's we can talk about female to male, or sorry, yeah, female to male, and how that can get dicey. And there's examples of that, but yeah, that keeps happening. And like the UFC, not the UFC maybe, but there was like maybe it was amateur, but they're cage fighting, right?
Yeah.
There was some transgender, male to female, who just broke a woman's face, and if you read about it, she's like, I've never felt more overpowered in my life. And she's like a pretty good, she's amateur, but she's been doing it for a long time. She's pretty good, just completely overpowered, obliterated, broke her cheekbones, like just punching her face, broke her face. That's not easy to do, right? But because this man, in every biological sense, a man just kicked the shit out of her, and it was completely unfair. And I don't know. There's a reason we separate the genders, you know what I mean, in so many sports. And this completely undoes that. If there's a reason and you buy that, and you must buy it. Like, I don't know maybe someone that's that feminist would be like, men and women should both play the same basketball, like on the same team. And then of course there would be no women on any basketball teams, at least not at the collegiate level or above. But, so nobody wants that. I don't think even feminists are advocating for that. So, which is like basically doublethink, right? That you can be like, women are exactly the same, and then at the same time, women should have their own sport, or else, they wouldn't be able to play. It's like you can't admit the contradiction, or else your world crumbles apart. It's exactly doublethink from 1984.
Yeah. But yeah, it seems to me that regardless of your opinion about transgender people and about whether this is a good policy or not, and whether it should be the policy or not, which I want to talk about that too. But regardless of any of that, what I think we ought to be able to agree on is that this does not make the competition fair for women. It does not ensure fair competition for women.
Right.
It just doesn't. It accomplishes the first thing that it sets out to do, which is include transgender people. It does not accomplish the second thing. So, I mean, in my mind, a policy that doesn't accomplish what it's meant to accomplish is not a good policy.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
So, I mean, but so let's talk about the other thing. Let's talk about the argument some people might make, which is that it doesn't need to be fair, or like the fairness isn't the important part. Like, even though it's not fair, we ought to have the policy anyway for the sake of inclusion, which I think is wrong. But you want to start on that?
That the inclusion is more important than
right.
fairness.
Yeah. So we should basically the argument would be we should have the policy in spite of the fact that it's not fair for women.
Right. Yeah. Geez, man. That is such an indefensible position. I can't like. I'm trying to think of how you could argue that. Especially if you think about the very fact that I get that like a man who is like gender dysphoria or suffering through that is you know deserves our empathy and our sympathy and deserves respect and the dignity that we should afford any person. Uh, so, but if you're like all upset about the patriarchy, right? If you're say the feminist who, if a man who didn't have long hair and get his nails done and therefore is a woman, if a man who dressed like a man and acted like a man came over and started kicking the shit out of ladies, every feminist would be pissed off. And now this man who has every advantage of all men that women think we have, the patriarchy and all that, whatever original sin we're born with as men, they're also born with it, and they just get to come over and obliterate the women and ruin their chance of competing, of winning, of doing well. And that seems like a very anti-feminist thing to me.
Yeah, it does. Let me try to be. I'll try to give some. I'm going to try to steel man this. So, I've there's a strongman group on Facebook that I'm part of, and some of the discussion around this has gone somewhat like it's almost kind of a utilitarian argument, saying there's not really that many transgender people out there, so it's not like which I think is a fair point. This is not going to have a huge effect on the sport.
Well, it only takes one to be the strongest woman.
Right. But so it's not going to have a huge effect at the local level. So at your average local strongman competition, which is what most people do, like most people in the sport don't really have aspirations of going to nationals or winning nationals or going to the Arnold or anything like that. A lot of people just do it for fun, do it for their health reasons or whatever, and it's not really about getting to the top levels of the sport. So at that level, it's not going to affect much because there's just not that many transgender people, and you're probably not even going to at most competitions at the local level, you're probably not even going to see one. Like they're just probably not going to be there because there's not that many of them. And it won't affect men either. It won't affect men in the sport, which I do want to acknowledge, because that's another thing that the social justice types say. Why are men bitching about this? Like they're not even going to be affected by it. Like, yeah, that's true. I'll grant you that, but that I can still have an opinion about it, and I do.
It doesn't change anything.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't change anything, but I'll just acknowledge that point. It is true. But where it will affect things is at the higher levels of women's competition, because if there are any transgendered, male to female transgendered people in the sport who want to go to the highest levels, they will. There's no reason that they won't be able to beat the shit out of everyone, go to nationals, beat the shit out of everyone there, and go to the Arnold. That's who it's going to affect. And the argument that, to be as fair as possible to that argument, I could see it being claimed that the effect is small enough that it's worth it. Like, acknowledge that there is a downside to, acknowledge that there is a downside and it's not going to be fair. The women at the highest levels are going to be affected, but it's worth it for the sake of including transgendered people. Mm. That's the best version of that I could think of.
Yeah.
I still think it's wrong, but that's the best version I could think of.
Hmm. Yeah, I can't really add to that. I think that's about as good as it can get. as far as a steel man.
Yeah.
Yeah. If anything, for me, I think the fact that the higher levels are affected makes it worse. You know what I mean? If you could somehow, if the opposite were somehow true, which is impossible, but if it were somehow true that only the amateur level would be affected by a policy that's unfair, but at the highest levels, it wouldn't make a difference. That would be better than if the highest levels are ruined. The highest level is the pinnacle of the sport. It's the dream. It's the mountaintop. You know what I mean? And if you can never get there, then I don't know why even bother. It seems very disheartening. And you know, I'd like to talk about another possible example because this is easy to imagine. So one might come back to us and be like, "You're assuming that any man who does female, strongman or strong woman is going to win and beat everyone," which is fair enough. That's not necessarily true. You could have a pretty weak man decide to go compete in strong woman, who's new at it, not really that strong, and might lose, right? But the fact is that he will still do better than he would have with the men. It's still not fair. Whatever place this transgender person gets is not going to be fair. You know what I mean? Even if he gets like fifth place, or you know what I mean? Like he wouldn't have done that at the same strength, in the male competition. So they're still screwing over somebody. Maybe 4 women didn't get screwed over, but maybe the dozens of others that showed up did get screwed over. You know what I mean? Or at least one that would have been 5th place instead of 6th place, whatever. Maybe that doesn't sound so bad. And that's certainly possible. You know what I mean? But it's also very possible that a very strong man can do this, like, and you think about like that MMA fighter that broke the woman's face, or the Australian person that obliterated all the records for the weightlifting, right?
Mm.
That has happened. It isn't unlikely, like we don't have to imagine, the scenario, because it has happened. There have been very strong, very powerful men that have become women and fought or lifted against women and obliterated them. They were very strong, objectively strong. Even as men, they would have been considered strong or,
Right.
good. And so that does happen, And then there's another example of, it was some track meet in like the Northeast somewhere. It's like high school. And this male, biological male, transitioned to female high school student, just obliterated like every track record at this track, state record at this track meet, against all the girls, right? It's like, of course, Now I probably couldn't go and break the freaking records against girls. I'm not very fast, right? So, my point is that someone might argue that we're assuming a very fast or very strong or very athletic man will become a woman and beat the crap out of everybody, when it's more likely that very average or mediocre men would do it and not necessarily kick the crap out of everyone. And that's certainly possible. But these are 3 specific examples of how that one is a fast boy competed with the girls and beat the crap out of everyone and broke state records. And, and then same thing with the Australian weightlifter and the MMA fighter. It's like, it's not far-fetched, and it does happen pretty much everywhere. Every few months we fight, or every year we hear another story about some new sport where some guy came and kicked the crap out of everybody because he's competing with women.
Right.
So it's not fair. And then the parents who are upset, or the competitors who are upset, they're the assholes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I actually have a friend. I know someone, a strong woman competitor who is at the top of she's at the top of the sport. I haven't talked to her about this. I don't know what her opinion on this policy is, but she's the kind of person that this is going to affect, because if there are any, strong man competitors who like there's going to be a few. The world is big enough. There's enough people in the world that there's going to be a few,
Right.
and they are more likely than not that they will end up at the highest levels of competition. And putting myself in the shoes of those top level women competitors, it's like you've trained for years for this. You've done everything possible within your power to become. You've done everything humanly possible to become as strong as you can be. You've trained for this for years. This is what your goal has been for years. And you get to the top level and you're there at the Arnold and you have a chance to compete for a world title, and someone who has a huge advantage over you because of their biological sex just mops the floor with you, and you couldn't have beat them no matter what you did. That's bullshit.
Yeah. I think it's easy to argue that if you take the same logic, you're completely throwing away the entire purpose for separating men and women.
Exactly.
You might as well stop. You might as well just put them together, and then
and that's
very few women will be able to compete.
That's another argument that I could see being made, is that, well, sports just aren't fair. People are born with different abilities and different potentials, and sports is never going to be fair. But like you said, if that's the argument you're going to make, why even have separate divisions for men and women? Like, women would not be able to compete if you didn't have separate divisions. So,
why have a WNBA? Why have women's soccer? Just allow women to try out for men's teams and see if they can make it. Maybe one or two. I'm sure there's some freaks out there that are that awesome, but I doubt they would be the best player on their team. Probably not even close. But anyway, in like any sport at all. But
certainly anything that involves physical strength in any way, or really speed or endurance or agility, any kind of physical athleticism. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and you think about it, whether it's slow twitch, fast twitch, speed, strength, endurance, whatever it is, the best men in the world are better than the best women in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And like I said before, I'll say this again, but like I said before, I'm not a doctor or anything. I'm not an expert on biology. So if anyone wants to try to convince me that because all of this whole conversation has been based on the premise that this does not make things fair for women. And if anybody wants to try to convince me that it actually does, I'm all ears. Like, convince me. I don't think you can, but go for it.
I guess that's fair. I suppose I can admit that, at least with this issue, I definitely live in an echo chamber, and I haven't heard a good, smart person give me a good reason for any of this stuff. That doesn't mean they don't exist. Certainly, I'm sure someone out there, fancies themselves reasonable, logical, and has that opinion somehow. So yeah, that's a good point. I actually would love to hear it. If someone wants to chime in, that'd be great.
Yeah. But I mean,
I can't say it doesn't exist. That's not fair, because again, echo chamber, as far as this goes, I've never, I'm not surrounded by it like a lot of people are.
Yeah. But that's the other aspect of this that I want to talk about, because the discussion on social media never revolves around that. It is never about the actual fact of the issue. Like, does this or does this not keep the competition fair for women? It's about, the left will say, great, strongman is for everyone now. like somebody posted that. I saw that in this group. Somebody actually posted that, like celebrating the fact that Strongman is for everyone now. And you know, if you complain about it, you're a transphobe or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I haven't heard that argument for the actual facts of the matter, but it's about that. It's about, you know, calling everyone a transphobe if they disagree with the policy. But yeah, I haven't heard the argument for why it's a good policy.
Yeah,
But that's the real reason. The real reason that I have a problem with this policy, you know, like I said, it doesn't affect me personally. The men's competitors are not going to be affected by this at all. But it's the culture war aspect of it to me. Like, that's why I'm concerned about it, because it's another concession to the radical left. It's another, and you know, another thing that people have been talking about is that Strongman Corporation did this to avoid a lawsuit, which I think probably that's true to some extent. And I think it's an awful thing that we live in a world where an organization legitimately has to worry about getting sued over something like that. And the reason this is such a big deal, the reason these lawsuits and these Twitter mobs or whatever are such a big deal is that not enough people had the balls to stand up and say no when this first started. To stand up and say, no, we're not doing this. This is, you know, not scientific. We're not going to do it. We're not going to cater to the radical left. But that's what it's about. That's what it's about for me. I mean, yeah, no, it doesn't affect me personally, but it is another concession to the radical left. It you know, and I'm not necessarily even saying that Strongman Corporation was wrong for doing this. If you know, if it's true that they did this to avoid a lawsuit, I get it. Like, you're trying to run a business, you don't want to go through an expensive lawsuit. It's probably easier to just pass something like this and go with it. But that's the reason it keeps happening, because nobody will put their foot down and say no. But I mean, that's why I'm concerned about it. Not because it affects me personally, because it doesn't.
Yeah. You know what's, I think, like, so you saw a tweet, or sorry, a Facebook post that was like, finally everyone can compete, or what was it?
Yeah, I got something to say about that too.
Right.
Like,
But
finally Strongman is for everyone. So I'm paraphrasing, but something like that.
So that is a nice idea, right? If there was a positive that came out of it, that is a nice idea. My one critique of it is that it's not like the military, where like you literally can't be a transgender person. You can now, but before it changed, you couldn't be a transgender person. You couldn't be a cross-dresser even, you know, and stay in. That was enough reason to boot you out, right?
Right.
Strongman was never like that, as far as I can tell. It's not that that same human being couldn't do it. It's just, if you were a biological man, you had to compete with men and get your ass kicked.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's not that they excluded them and they weren't allowed to compete. It was always for everyone, right? It's not like the military where it was illegal to be there. It was always legal. You just had to compete in the fair division, and it was unfair for you, but that was your own fault because you decided that you know, we're going to lower your testosterone or whatever. If the example is a biological woman who's taking hormones and, you know, hormone treatment to become a man, and that biological woman competes in the female division, that's not, I don't think it's that advantageous, because it's my understanding that in Strongman, there are no drug tests, and many of the best strongmen are taking, you know, steroids.
Oh yeah, lots of them are.
So if a biological woman was taking all this stuff to transition to male, I'm sure the natural competitors would be at a disadvantage, but the natural competitors are already at a disadvantage, you know, even without transgender people, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, so that's not as bad of a situation. But the man who is taking estrogen and stuff, trying to be more feminine, and the biological man who has a low testosterone, all that, and then wants to compete and then competes with the males will be at a horrible disadvantage. So kind of like, so the only person, like, you know, just like how in the rules, it doesn't matter if biological women compete with men. It's only the biological men competing with women that has the special circumstances, like rules attached to it, right? That same group is the only group that would be at a disadvantage competing with their own biological sex. But it is certainly not an advantage, I would think, for the female, biological female, to compete with the females if you know, with the hormones and stuff. But my point is, that's a nice social justice thought, but it's not really true that they weren't allowed to compete before. They were. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't actually. The policy doesn't actually include anyone new, because no one was excluded. All it does is say that
it's now easier for you.
People with penises can compete with the women, and people with vaginas can compete with the men.
Right.
That's all it does.
Yeah. Exactly. So, but the same people with penises and vaginas could have competed before. They just would have had to compete with their own biological sex, right?
Right.
So, you know, it doesn't super work. It makes it easier for those people. They have, like, literally, it's like cheat codes for those people instead of it being fair. But, you know, so maybe that's worth celebrating to that same person who says finally it's for everyone, but it's not. They're kind of wrong about that. It was always for everyone. So
yeah, I agree. But yeah, like I said, the if you want to call it the culture, I don't know. People call it the culture war sometimes. That's kind of that's a little bit of a dramatic term, but
the battle of ideas.
That's the war of ideas. That's the part of it that concerns me the most. And you know, I don't know. Maybe we can go into that if you want, but
I mean, as far as the culture war goes, or the war of ideas, like, I don't want to give an inch to unreason. I'm totally willing to compromise with just liberal ideas, or even social justice ideas. But this one is ridiculous. All right. We're not talking about, you know, I don't know, trying to give, I don't know, to have a policy that makes up for past discrimination. We're literally screwing people over, and we're making it unfair. It's not the same as, like, you know, social justice for Black people or even gays, or, you know, or whatever. Like, if they let a gay man compete in Strongman, he's just as likely to be the strongest guy in the room as a straight man. You know what I mean? There is no advantage that he gets, you know, like, it's different because it's biological, you know what I mean? And it's almost always, you know, the issue, it's a totally different thing to argue about. We're talking about bathrooms, you know, and who gets to use what bathroom. I mean, that's an important thing that, you know, whatever, but it's totally separate. You know what I mean? You're making people uncomfortable. That's different than actually making, you know, something totally unfair.
And yeah, you know, this is an example of where this ideology breaks down. It's because if you view the left, kind of radical leftist postmodernist ideology views the world as a power struggle between groups. It's like oppressor versus oppressed. And if you view the world in those terms, you get conflicts like this, because who matters more to make the world fair for? Like, do you want to make the world fair for transgender people, or more fair for women? Like, those are both considered oppressed classes by the radical left. So you can't do both. You can't include trans people in a sport like this and also make it fair for women. So, like, if you view the world in those terms as, you know, power struggle between oppressor and oppressed, what happens when you have a conflict between the interests of two oppressed classes? How do you solve that? You can't.
Yeah. Or they do it with some hierarchy of suffering, or hierarchy of, you know, I don't know, systemic oppression, you know, whoever.
Right. Who's more oppressed?
Right. Whoever has the standing higher on the podium in the oppression Olympics is the one you choose. So I'm sure that maybe a lot of people would argue. I mean, first of all, I'm not interested in this actual debate, but it's a fun thought experiment. Is who historically does have it worse, transgender men, transgender people, or women? Historically, I'd say throughout human history, women have had it pretty rough, and I want to say that essentially transgender, like, kind of almost, okay, I don't want to say this. I was going to say didn't exist, but sure, I'm sure the same exact thing happened, but it just wasn't an option. That just wasn't a thing. You just didn't do that,
Yeah,
but,
there wasn't a name for it.
right. And if they did it, maybe some cultures would have totally, like, beat them down or killed them. But, you could say the same thing about a lot of shit for women, women getting stoned on doorsteps because they weren't a virgin on their wedding night. I don't know. Like, and just the sheer number of women. Half of humans through all history have been women. So for our entire existence, 50% of the population, so in just sheer utilitarian numbers, women have had it worse because
The volume of oppression has been worse for
sure,
women.
by volume.
Yeah.
Maybe per capita, it's not as maybe transgenders win. And certainly lately, I'd say in the last like 50 years, it was certainly worse. Maybe worse to be transgender. This is a fun thing because I'm chiming in on an argument I'm not even interested in having. And I'm sure just the fact that I'm even chiming in on who has it worse would totally, drive some social justice warrior up a wall. But, it should just prove how stupid the whole thing is when I start chiming in about who has it worse, right? But this is America and it's 2018, so I think no one, everyone's fine.
Gingers
have it the worst.
Gingers have it the worst.
Yep, that's true.
Well, anyway, yeah, I agree with you. I don't want to give an inch to the social justice left. Like, I am not shy about saying that, and I don't know.
Yeah, that's why you can say,
Yeah.
even though it doesn't affect you directly as a strongman competitor,
Right. Yeah.
there's more at stake here. You know what I mean? And it's, are we willing to just give up reason and science, and trade all that for feelings and emotions, like what's
Right.
our real value as a society,
Right. So the threat of a lawsuit or the threat of public perception of you being an oppressor is enough justification to throw science out the window and to throw fair competition out the window. I think that's a terrible thing for society.
What's funny is fairness and justice are almost synonyms. So it's like, how can you have social justice and create an unfair situation? You know what I mean? Especially if both parties in the unfair situation are oppressed people on your hierarchy, on your, oppression hierarchy, right? So you're making a circumstance and you're arguing it doesn't matter if it's fair. It's for justice. But it's like, that's basically a synonym. Justice means pretty much that people get what they deserve. That another word for that might be fairness. Like maybe they're used in different ways, but they're basically synonyms. So that's kind of a funny contradiction. There's so many contradictions in this philosophy. There's so much that doesn't work. But anyway,
well, it's because truth takes a backseat to rectifying oppression,
right?
Or to giving people, I guess the way the word justice is used is basically giving people some kind of reparations for past injustices.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people have been treated unfairly in the past, therefore the just thing to do is to make it up to them somehow.
Yeah. In a sense, you're saying they should get what they deserve, and what they deserve is retribution or some sort of, vengeance or whatever, retaliation. Those are all very violent sounding words, but basically that's what it is. Even if it's not violence, it's a sense of vengeance. You know what I mean? That there's a wrong that needs to be righted by, the opposite, by by going the other direction and not just getting to a state of equality, an equal state. You got to offset the past injustice, right? So anyway, yeah, I think, yeah. So just real quick, let's talk about, there's only one example I can think of that I read about and heard about. And this is a biological female who's, going through hormone treatment to be a boy. This is a teenager, right? This actually happened in Texas, and there was a Texas high school wrestling.
Oh, I think I heard about this.
So I guess in Texas they probably every state, they have girls wrestling and they have boys wrestling.
They didn't in Kansas.
Well, okay. So I actually remember in high school, this didn't happen often. Like there was like once a year, there was a meet that was during the school day and we went and watched it. But I remember there was a girl who wrestled a guy from my school. So the girl was from another school, the guy was from my school, and they wrestled.
Yeah, there was always that's how it was when I wrestled in high
Right.
school.
There
were a few girls, but there was not a girls
right
wrestling division.
Right. So I don't know. For all I know, there was a girls wrestling division, and this girl was just that badass that she wanted to wrestle the dudes. Maybe, I don't know. There may have or may not have been a female wrestling in Tennessee. I'm not sure, but I guess in Texas they have girls and boys.
Yep.
It's neat, that women can do that and compete with each other, and that's cool. It's the same reason as any other, sport. But they do not let the girls compete with the boys, like in the boys division. So it's funny because if the same thing happened in my state, it wouldn't be a big deal, right? Because there's no such thing as girls. Maybe there's no such thing as girls wrestling. But this biological girl who was a boy, transitioned to be a boy, and had done all the hormones. She had really high testosterone and steroids. Like this is literally like prescribed by a doctor as part of the treatment was to be on, I don't know about steroids, but at least on, hormones, right? Mm-hmm. So testosterone boosters. And now in this person's defense, like she wanted to compete with the males in the male division, in the male, side. So if that were the case, she would have no real advantage, right? But Texas said no. It's like they don't allow it in that state. So I'll give this biological girl some credit, you know what I mean? Because at least that would have been fair. At least that wouldn't have been unfair. But because they wouldn't, instead she competed in the female division and kicked the crap out of everyone. Right. So she's all jacked up on testosterone, beefy, buff, badass, and just kicked the crap out of everyone. And this is Texas. So the parents were, not as shy about their feelings, about this when their girls all got obliterated. Right. So this is an example of if, so this is a case, instead of giving in to the social justice, left and letting the girls compete with the boys and the boys compete with the girls, Texas didn't do that. And then you still had a problem. But this is a sport where performance enhancing drugs are against the rules. So if it's bodybuilding or strongman, that's not a big deal. But if it's football, baseball, wrestling, it is a problem that you're not allowed to take performance enhancing drugs, even in high school. Right. So all these girls are not allowed to, and they literally made an exception. So that is a little social justice give, is that they made an exception. This girl who's on testosterone would have been disqualified if it weren't for they made an exception for if it's like prescribed by a doctor for this treatment, then it's allowed. But then I think maybe in like 2 years in a row, state champion, kick the crap out of everybody, so I'll give that person some credit because she wanted to compete with the boys and they wouldn't let her. But that's another situation where you don't quite give in. And see, that's why it's not such a problem with strong women, because they're all, all the best ones are taking, steroids and shit. Right. So
not all.
Okay.
Some.
It's if it's not against the rules, someone's doing it. You know what I mean? And
yeah, I actually think I know the top level men are all doing it. I'm pretty sure.
Mhm.
I'm not so sure about the women.
Okay, but either way, you get what I'm saying. So let's go with bodybuilding instead. They are definitely taking steroids. The best women and the best men, they're all at the highest level. They're taking steroids. But yeah, in a sport where that's not allowed, even a biological female competing with other females is also not fair, right? So it's two specific circumstances that are unfair. A biological male competing with females, and then a biological female who's on the hormone treatment or whatever, transitioned, competing with females. So in both cases, girls are getting screwed over,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's the only example I've heard of that one. It's always like,
Yeah, I haven't heard of any others. But yeah,
you got anything else?
I guess the last point, I got to go back to this. This is less about the issue itself and more about the way we talk about it. But and I guess this is the same issue that happens with every other conversation about social justice, is that the way people who advocate for this stuff tend to argue about it is ridiculous and infantile. Like I saw a comment on, it was on one of these posts about this in the Strongman Facebook group. Someone said, LOL, I love how everybody crying about this is all men. And that's such an infantile way of arguing. That's like your 10-year-old brother keeps poking you and saying, poking you to try to annoy you. And then when you get pissed off about it, they're like, why are you getting pissed off?
Yeah.
Like, that's what it's for. The purpose of that, it's not an argument. The purpose of that is to piss people off.
Yeah.
And then when they get pissed off, you can say, why are you getting pissed off? It's a tactic. It's an infantile way of discussing things.
Yeah, it's unreason. That's exactly what it is. It's, if I say, or no, if you say, right to exist this, and white privilege that, and patriarchy that, and then I come back with, you're wrong for reasons X, Y, and Z. The way a normal debate and logic would work is that you can defeat what I just said by taking, you could take the same premises and come up with a different conclusion, showing that my conclusion isn't necessary, or you can take, some of the premises and prove that they, oh my God, Rollo, stop fucking doing that. God, anyway. Sorry, totally ruined. It's gonna destroy the pillow. I couldn't let it happen. Anyway, I say we just leave that in. Okay. Anyway, so, God, what the hell was I even saying?
You're talking about logic,
right? So I say you're wrong for X, Y, and Z, and so anyway, yeah, you say same premises, different conclusion. You can show that, or you say, yes, those premises would draw that conclusion, but your premises are wrong, and here's why. Right? That's how arguing works. Instead, they come back with, you're a white straight male.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, I guess that's the end of that's the end. I lose now. Because so it's ridiculous. It's like they found a way around it, and it isn't a way around it. They don't win. They lose, right? It's like the next best thing to being right is being smug, and just feeling like. And I saw this. Literally, this is everywhere, right? I saw it was. I mean, I didn't really address. I didn't comment, but I saw on Twitter some guy posted something. He wrote an article all about white privilege. He's an old white guy, and he wrote about white privilege. It was like 80% of the article was saying white privilege exists, and then like 20% of it was maybe like 90% of the article was white privilege is a thing, and then 10% of the article was Jordan Peterson doesn't believe in white privilege, so he's racist.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then people argue with that, And then he thought it was some grand, beautiful point, like, funny how everyone who's responded negatively is a white male. And he's a white guy too, by the way. But not that that matters, you know. It's like, how do you seriously lay your head down on your pillow at night and think, yeah, I got those guys. That was a good one. Go me. It's like, dude, you are like a child that is infantile. You are not intelligent. You're not intelligent enough to argue. You know what I mean? The fact that people aren't ashamed of that is something that I find very funny. It's a very social justice sort of new intelligence, you know. It's like instead of being intelligent and you know, using logic or reason. Now reason itself is like a tool of the patriarchy, right? It's like that's some sort of win. And they have and what's funnier than that is how many people are like, see that tweet and like it, and they're like, yeah, you got him.
yeah,
you know? Like, got him, you know. It's like,
yeah, it's not about using logic, it's about sounding it's about having the most snappy thing to say.
Right. And it's not even snappy. It's not clever, you know.
Yeah.
It's not clever. It's not intelligent. You know, it's not an intelligent response. It's not a clever diss. You're literally just saying a fact about someone's, you know, what do you call it? Immutable characteristics. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'd be like, if I said that, you know, women are more attracted to faces that are smooth and have no hair on them, and you come back and say, you know, actually, according to this study done last year, you know, 70% of women actually prefer at least some facial hair. And then I come back with, well, you have a beard. Like, that's my response. Like, you have a beard, so it doesn't count. Like, that's not a response. I did not just win. It didn't undo anything you just said. But yeah, that's exactly how this turns out, you know. Like, yeah, it's funny how it's all guys responding to this transgender strongman thing, right? It's like, good, yeah, you got me, bro. You win. Like,
right.
Jesus.
You know, logic needs to be taught in schools.
Yeah, like, certainly more important than cursive.
You know, Sam Harris put out a AMA episode today, and one of the questions was, what would you like if you were to create Sam Harris's school for, you know, children or whatever, like the academy of you know, upbringing kids, the Sam Harris version. You know, what would you want to teach people? And one of the things he said was logic. He said logic should be, studying logic and reason in schools should be just as common as studying math and English.
Yeah. It's like arithmetic. It's like, it's that like strict, you know. Yeah. Things have to be, you know. It has to.
Yeah,
be
if
it has to be 4, just like, and that's how logic works as well.
Right. Like a logical argument. If a logical argument is sound, and I can't remember the terms. I know one of the terms is sound. But if you accept the premises of a sound argument, it will walk you through step by step. If you accept this, you have to accept this. You have to accept this.
Yeah.
And if you don't accept the conclusion at the end of it, when you accepted all the premises and the argument is sound, there's, you know, you're not being logical.
Yeah. Or you have to come back with how you could maybe get a different conclusion with the same premises, you know.
Yeah.
That it doesn't necessarily follow. So you basically got to point out a fallacy. That's like the fallacies and you know, premises and conclusions, right? So yeah, and I actually want to learn more about logic. I mean, I've done it. I think I'm a logical person. Logic, kind of like math, is sort of intuitive. You got to learn it, but it also makes sense. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's obviously formal training that would make you better. You know what I mean? So it's almost natural. Like, you can naturally figure out that 2 oranges plus 2 oranges is 4 oranges. You know what I mean? If you have 4 oranges in front of you and you split them up, you can actually see that, right? So I think logic, you can intuit a lot of logic. You can get there, you know, naturally without being taught it. But to get good at it, you really got to get taught it, you know. And a lot of people don't intuit logic, and it's not natural. So yeah, same with math, you know. But anyway, Yeah, that's a great idea. I think I completely agree. Absolutely. Get rid of home ec, add logic, or something like that. I don't know. Or just teach them younger. Get rid of cursive and teach them logic. I actually like cursive.
I agree.
So, that's just me. I wouldn't get rid of it. But still, we learn a lot of stupid crap. We learn about the names of the clouds in like the second grade, and then you never, ever, ever learn it again unless you literally become a meteorologist. So it's a very specific science to learn at that age. Let's wait till people have decided what they care about, and then if you want to be a meteorologist, we'll teach you about the names of the
I think they teach that because it's a thing that you can just give them a list of pictures and a list of words to memorize, and it's easy to teach. And the teacher doesn't have to think about it.
I think half of what we learn in elementary school is literally like, we have to keep these kids busy while their parents are at work, for like, so what else can we, throw at them? We've done the important crap. Now let's throw some other stupid crap. And so just to keep busy,
Yeah.
But anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Logic should be taught in schools.
Yep. So is that it for,
yeah, that's about all I got to say about that.
Yeah. So real quick, I did want to talk about one thing I saw. So I'm just going to actually, if you give me a minute, I'm going to pull this up. It is, so I was, there was some tweet I saw. It was like an article, about, amending the Constitution. I think it may have been about the birthright citizenship thing when Mr. Trump talked about, ending birthright citizenship with an executive order. And I was reading some article that was, it was pretty lefty article, but so it was talking about it got to the part where it was talking about the amending the Constitution and how you would do that. And it was talking about the different ways that you could pass an amendment. And it said, and it described the methods. So there's 4 different methods technically about how you can amend, bring about a constitutional amendment. There's 4 methods to bring it about, right? And they named them, and I thought one of them sounded wrong, or a couple of them sounded wrong. So it's 4 because there's like 2 distinct ways to propose it, and then 2 distinct ways to ratify it. So the combination of those two different things is 4 different possibilities, right?
Yeah.
And that's true. But that's not the point. So I'm not going to dig into that right now. But the point is that it described the 4 ways, and it seemed like 2 of them were kind of wrong. Basically, I will say. So one way to propose it is that 2/3 of both houses of Congress pass it. Right. They propose an amendment to the Constitution, and 2/3 of both houses say yes. Then it goes to the states to be ratified. Right. Now there's 2 ways to ratify it at the state level, and that's why there's 4. Right. But anyway, so that's one way to propose it. The other way to propose it is on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. Okay. The Congress, sorry if I cut out this and I say it the right way grammatically. The Congress, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. So that's it. So
if 2/3 of the states get together and say we want to call a conference to propose an amendment, then Congress can do that.
So what really happens is, what the lady said in the article I was reading was that the second method was that 2/3 of the state legislatures all vote they pass a resolution or whatever. They just, decide to call a convention of the states. So if 2/3 of the states legislatures agree to that, then she said, then the Congress, if they do that, then the Congress has to vote. And if 2/3 of the Congress says yes, then they have a convention of the states. So it makes that pointless, right? It makes the 2/3 of the states. So her explanation was wrong, and I thought it was wrong. So I went to read Article 5. And it turns out, like I just read, it says the Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And
So the Congress doesn't vote on it.
Right. It says, so the states, if 2/3 of the several states apply for it, then Congress shall call a convention. They don't have a choice, but it is Congress that calls the convention. It's a continental Congress, basically, right? A continental convention, like the original, right? So it's basically a new constitutional convention, is what they're calling, right? And that's a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments. So it's not even like the states deciding, necessarily we want to. They might do this, but when they're asking for a convention, they're not saying we want to add an amendment to, I don't know, repeal the Second Amendment, right? They're not saying that necessarily. They might say that, but instead what they're actually voting for is a convention. Anyway, I wasn't supposed to get off topic here. The point is, I thought she was wrong. I was like, that doesn't make sense. Why, if 2/3 of them is like, yeah, the Congress is doing it, but it's not that the Congress has no choice at that point, right? So I went to read it to make sure she was wrong. Turns out she's wrong. She just worded it wrong, whatever. It was probably typo, whatever. And then, okay, for the sake of finishing my point, or what got me on this tangent is it can be ratified two different ways, and then it'll be if it's ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states, or by conventions in 3/4 of the states, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed. So you could have Congress could propose the amendments, like the first method, to propose it, and then there could be a convention of states to ratify it, right? Where you send people, a delegation to the convention, as opposed to just your legislature votes on it. So that's the two ways it can be ratified. Your legislature votes on it, or you send delegates to a convention of some kind to vote on it, right? But when I was reading it, I noticed, I'd never noticed this before, because, even though I have a constitutional podcast, I'm not a constitutional expert. I'm learning as I go, and I will do a short episode about this. Turns out, I'll just read you verbatim the last sentence, and it's a little wordy at first. So it says Congress, whatever. Basically, Congress, when they propose an amendment, if 3/4 of the states pass it, then it shall be considered a part of the Constitution, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first or fourth clause in the 9th section of the first article. And that's because literally in those parts, that was basically where they ended the slave trade. In the Constitution, it said like that until 1808, we cannot make any laws ending the slave trade, basically. They didn't word it that way, but that's what it was for. It was basically a compromise to get the southern states to sign the Constitution, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, between the passing of this and 1808, they wanted to ensure that we couldn't just amend the Constitution to get rid of that, right? So anyway, basically, once 1808's over, that part of this fifth Article 5 doesn't matter anymore. So basically, it says, provided that no amendment, can undo that, and that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So I'll read it. I'll leave out the first part and read it again. So, paraphrasing, Congress, we can amend the Constitution by 3/4 of the states, and it'll effectively be part of the Constitution, provided that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So our founders, I always thought of this. I mean, we know there's the Article 5. We can amend the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Our founders, effectively, after that 1808, had one exception to that rule. It is unamendable. You cannot amend away a state's equal suffrage in the Senate. So without their consent, so you could have, a state could potentially get rid of its own, but you can't just have 3/4 of the states decide, okay, from now on, we're doing proportional representation in the Senate. You cannot do that, right? It would literally take 100% of the states would have to do it, because the state itself would then be agreeing to lose its own suffrage. So Tennessee can decide among itself, we don't want equal suffrage in the Senate anymore. But who the hell would do that?
Yeah, right.
They won't do that. So basically, this is what's awesome.
So that's the one thing in the Constitution that's not amendable.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't looked into that exact thing you're saying. There might be something else that is worded in such a way somewhere else that it can't be. But the only exception in Article 5 to the amendment process anymore after 1808 is the equal suffrage in the Senate. So there's a couple things about that. First of all, it's like, we're all scared of the far left taking over Congress and the Senate and the presidency and just running roughshod over our entire system. They want to stack the Supreme Court. They want to end the Electoral College. They want to end, they want to turn the Senate into a House of Representatives, right? A second house. This is the one thing we don't even have to worry about. They can't do anything about it. And that's so awesome. It's like, just eat it, like, you can't, how great is that? So there's a couple things about that. That really demonstrates how important that was to our founders, right? That people think they didn't think about this. They're like, the founders couldn't have conceived California being so huge or such a big population. It's like, dude, yes, they did. They thought hard about it. The only thing you can't amend, you can amend away free speech, technically, according to this. You can amend away the right to bear arms. You can amend away the right to, a fair trial, or to not, what do you call it?
You could amend slavery. You could amend slavery back into the Constitution if you wanted to.
You could do that. You cannot amend the equal suffrage of the states in the Senate. That is how important they thought it was. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. And it demonstrates how much our founders were afraid of democracy. This is something that comes up all the time, and like by, sort of any sort of smartass, every time they see like, oh, our democracy is falling apart, and like, it's not a democracy, dude. It's actually a republic, you idiot. So, and we think but they know that, they know that technically, but then they just go on about using the word democracy, right? But strictly speaking, this demonstrates how important it was to our founders that a giant consensus, a giant majority couldn't just destroy the minority, right? So it takes a huge consensus to amend the Constitution. So that's already like, the will of the people is important. But if there wasn't equal representation in the Senate, then the little states, right, would have no say in anything, right? So this is just case in point for how they did not believe that the will of the people could supersede the rights of the few, right? That the little guy had rights. And that's why this is not a democracy. Democracy, like Ben Franklin said, is two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. And liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. Our system was set up so that the majority could not run roughshod over the minority, right? And who wouldn't want that? You know what I mean? So that's the funny thing about the social justice minorities. They think ethnically, but it's
you said you kind of said this sarcastically, but how some people say, well, they could never have conceived of California, like a state as big as California, right, when that's kind of the purpose. Yeah, like they put that in there because they thought of that.
Yes, yes. People are so stupid. I mean, you can disagree with the founders. That's one thing, but people don't do that. They just don't bother even wondering why the founders did that. They have no clue, and they don't care to know. They're told by some blue check mark lefty, California has this many people and it has this, this percentage of the vote in the Senate. And then Iowa has this percentage of the people.
Yeah. In the Senate. This goes to a different issue. I was listening to, it was Douglas Murray, I think, talking, it was in one of those intellectual dark web events. And Douglas Murray was talking about this, not about the Constitution. He's British, but he was talking about how there is a new generation of he was basically talking about the social justice left, the millennials of the social justice left in particular. And he said that I'm going to be paraphrasing and I'll probably butcher it, but he said there is a new generation of people who basically think they're smarter than their ancestors, think they're more rational, more logical, more knowledgeable, just better in every way than their ancestors, and have never even bothered to study their ancestors.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about. It's like you can make the argument all day that the founders were wrong about X, Y, or Z. But first you have to understand why they made the decisions they made. Like, if you want to say that they're wrong about something, go for it. But understand why that's there first.
Yeah, well, we know why they made those decisions, because they were racist, bigot, homophobe slave owners who hated women.
Right. I forgot.
Yeah,
of course.
Every decision they made was because of that.
Right. But the point is, like, they could just flippantly saying that, well, why should we listen to a bunch of old white dudes?
Yeah.
It's the same point about, well, everybody complaining about this transgender thing as men. That's a non-argument.
Yep.
It is arguing based on immutable characteristics of people.
Nothing burger.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're criticizing something you don't understand.
Yep. So I just like I can't. It's blown my mind, right? When I discovered this, and that's why soon I'm going to be doing, a full blown. It'll be a short episode, but I'm gonna do one about it, right? But this demonstrates so perfectly how scared the founders were of majoritarianism. Because if you think about it, right, they made this system, they gave equal suffrage in the Senate to the little states. If they hadn't done that, only like 3 states would have signed the Constitution, right? It was a compromise. The bicameral legislature was a compromise. If they were both represented proportionally, there would literally be no purpose of having 2. They're not a check on each other. If the same state just votes for 2 Democrats, you vote in the House, you vote in the Senate, you vote for Democrats because you're a Democrat, and every single person votes for both, right? They would be identical houses. They might have different powers, but they wouldn't check each other's power, because the will of the people would make them identical in their what do you call it? Demographic.
Their party makeup.
Yes, they'd be identical. Why wouldn't they? Because it's the same thing. So, like, this demonstrates that if you think about it, once the Constitution was ratified, and all it takes is 3/4 of the states. That's not easy, but it takes 3/4 of the states. So this is a really like amending the Constitution is a demonstration of the will of the people. It is democratic in that people are voting, not necessarily individuals, but states, whoever are voting, right? They're voting on something, and that's so the will of the majority wins the day. But it's a super majority, but still. Like, what if you had? Yeah, exactly. If they did conceive of something like a California that would pop up, right, and several other states like that they don't think it's fair that they get the same number of senators as. So if you get enough states to buy that, 3/4 of them, then that'd be like the first thing to go. The 11th Amendment would have basically been, ending equal suffrage in the Senate. Maybe not the 11th, but it wouldn't have taken long, right? That was. Once you're in it, you're stuck. If you're Rhode Island, you're stuck, right? And now, if all it takes is, if you can get rid of something like that, like Rhode Island's right to have an equal say in the Senate, then you would be effectively getting rid of Rhode Island's very purpose for signing the Constitution in the first place, right? That would be a violation of the social contract of the very reason that they even are part of the United States, right? So, like, holy crap, this is more important than gun rights. This is more important than freedom of speech to the founders, this is it has to be the most important thing, that you can't amend it, right?
Yeah.
So the two big takeaways are: eat it, lefties. Nothing you can do about it at all. Nothing, right? And then the second part is like, wow, it's mind blowing how afraid of majoritarianism, of the will of the majority, the founders were, and that they set up checks and balances for that purpose, and that they made it unamendable to end that check and balance on majoritarianism. Some things are majoritarian. It's a mixture, right? That's what our system is. It's a mix of majoritarianism in the House, basically, and kind of the president, and the Senate being equal representation. It means that no matter how big California gets, Rhode Island, or Wyoming in this case, because it actually has less people, right? Wyoming has some sort of power. You know what I mean? They are a state, not just a county in this giant state that is the United States. So anyway, I love that, and I can't wait to do a full-blown episode on it.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So I hope that word spreads. I haven't seen it. I never saw it. I accidentally found this. Most of what I find out, I'm not that smart. I find it because I read something and like, oh, neat, and then I go dig in a little deeper. But this, I totally discovered it. I'm sure other people know this, but I never see it. I've seen so many times some dumbass says something on Twitter about, how about when people were posting after the election, like, oh, here's the senatorial popular vote. Like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. You idiot. Right? They're like, as if that's some point, like, oh, they won like 60% of the Democrats won like 60% of the popular vote in the Senate, in the whole Senate, of everyone that voted in the Senate. And it's like, dude, that is not how this works. But anyway, so yeah, I never see someone respond with that point. So I'm like really pumped and I hope the word spread. I hope people realize this, and we can shut them up at least about it. I mean, they can still cry about it. I'm sure they will.
Now you got a new big old stick of logic to hit people with.
Yeah, exactly. Big old stick of truth, little reality check for them. Like, oh, what's it feel like that there's nothing you can do about it? Eat it. Jesus. Not even the most hardcore example, amending the Constitution.
Well, the next thing people will say is, why are we still using the Constitution?
Yeah.
Like, people, that sounds ridiculous. And like, I'm not alarmist. I'm not like, oh my God, the left is going to destroy the Constitution. I think plenty of them would like to, probably. I don't think it's going to happen, or at least, I don't think it's going to happen in the near future.
Yeah, I think
it'll happen sometime. Like, America's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
No country ever lasts forever.
Sure.
But
yeah, I mean, it may end well before the end of equal suffrage in the Senate. Like, it may have nothing to do with our end, but yeah,
right. But yeah, I mean, some people would probably say that, like, instead of trying to argue that you can do that according to the Constitution, they'll say, why don't we just get rid of the Constitution? It was written by a bunch of old white guys 250 years ago. So
sure, they could do that. They could try. Yeah, and I think there are certainly people who give zero moral weight to the Constitution. Plenty of people. I mean, I love Sam Harris, but he literally said in a podcast, the Constitution is only important to me in so much as it, in so much as it's useful, right? Like, he admitted it outright. But I think a lot of people are like that. You know what I mean? They may not admit it to themselves even, like,
yeah. And, I'm not entirely sure what I think about that. I think the Constitution is it's one of the best, if not the best, methods of governance that humans have come up with so far. But I don't think that it's definitely the best possible form of government that anyone could ever come up with.
Sure.
I'm willing to entertain the possibility of something else.
Right.
I don't know what it would be, but if there was something else, if there was some other form of government or some other founding document that that did a better job of contributing to the well-being of people, I don't know. This is like a question of well-being versus human rights. It's like what if guaranteeing fundamental human rights to the maximum extent possible was a net negative for well-being?
Sure.
Would it be worth it to not guarantee fundamental human rights for the sake of well-being, or are the rights more important even if we are objectively not as well off as we could be?
Right. Well, I think what's important is that, like I just said there, everything about the Constitution could be amended except equal suffrage in the Senate. Like everything else can be amended. You could get rid of the executive branch if you want to, I imagine, based on strictly the word of the Constitution. You could get rid of the House of Representatives, right? You could go that extreme. You know what I mean? You could get rid of free speech. You could have that. If that's the world that 75% of the states agreed on, then they could do that, except equal suffrage in the Senate, right? But other than that, they get rid of everything. And I wouldn't support that. I do like not only do I think we must abide by the Constitution, and it can be changed, but I also think it's a good Constitution. It's a great Constitution.
I'm not disputing that.
Right. So I would not argue that, but even if that was the consensus, the important part is that we can't just ignore it. We have to change it, because if you can just ignore it, if that's okay, then it is pointless. It cannot protect us from the encroachments of government power. It cannot protect us from the majority. I say it like that, from the majority, right? It can't protect us from anything. It is a blank sheet of paper if we could ignore it. And what's the great truth about the Constitution is that it's not the courts or the House or the Senate or the president that really defend it, that are the arbiters that keep it going. If we, the people, don't care anymore, then there's nothing will stop them being the government, any branch of the government, or the states, if it's, they're violating some part of the Constitution. Nothing can stop them without our anger.
Compliance.
I'm saying without our anger, there's nothing that stops them. Without our retribution to them violating the Constitution, nothing actually stops it. And I think this is a big part of what's wrong with judicial review. And I think it's allowed Americans to care less about the Constitution. If that wasn't a thing, maybe, this might be a chicken or egg thing. I don't know. But maybe we stopped caring so much, and that's why we we allowed it, basically. We let the courts just basically decide everything for us. Or maybe the fact that the courts decided everything for us is why we decided to stop caring, right? We don't teach our children liberty. We don't teach them to be free. We don't teach them to know their founding document, to know the rules. We don't. But our founders did. Our founders' children did. Our founders' children's children did. At some point along the way, it just wasn't as important. And I think that's the case. We've delegated, and we expect, so to what extent we care about the Constitution, we expect the Supreme Court to defend it. We expect the Supreme Court to be the ones that divvy out punishments, and they can't punish, but divvy out, whatever retribution on our behalf, right? Roe v. Wade was a great victory just to a bunch of people, that the Supreme Court did that. They went in and saved the day when the legislature wouldn't, or whatever, right? And that's how everyone expects the court to behave, So we've pawned off that responsibility, but it is ultimately ours, right? if we don't care anymore, they won't actually not violate it. That's my point. Like the Supreme, and this is a point I've made in several of my episodes, right? It's that the president doesn't have to do what the Supreme Court says. The House or the Congress doesn't have to do what the Supreme Court says. They have no power to enforce their rulings, right? They choose to. And why do they choose to? Why do they choose to obey? You know, when a circuit court says, you know, that the Trump administration, that they are not allowed to deny asylum claims for people who have entered illegally. So if someone is in the country illegally, they cross the wall, you know, it's not the wall, damn it. Sorry, they cross the border illegally. They're here now. They can't show up and ask for asylum. Trump started enforcing that. And then a circuit court judge or district court judge, whichever one, said, you can't do that. And it literally like shut down the government. Like that they couldn't do it anymore. The truth is they can. And the administration chooses to obey. But they choose to obey because of political consequences, because the people still give enough of a crap, not enough really, but enough, barely enough for the Congress to most of the time obey what the court says. And the same thing with the executive, right? That's what really keeps them in check is us. And that's why the government's so much bigger and doesn't abide by the Constitution, because we care less and less all the time. So then they usurp more and more all the time. So that's the real truth of it. This is a blank sheet of paper. It might as well be if we don't care. So if everyone has that attitude of Sam Harris, right, then it not only, so whatever, yeah, it's only as far as it's useful, then, you know, that's where I care, right? Even if it's great that we can think of some better system and implement it. But that system, whatever we come up with, it can't actually, it's not enforceable unless we care. You know what I mean? So that's why it's so important to care. You know, nothing keeps us safe. Nothing protects us from tyranny if we don't care. And we are free to amend it. And that's what we should do. We should care enough that if we don't like something about it, we change it. We convince enough people and we change it. But anyway, that's a long rant.
Yeah. That mindset that Sam Harris has, it's like his,
I think it's consequentialism.
yeah, it is. It's consequentialism. But, you know, his system of morality that he lays out in the moral landscape, it is consequentialist.
Yep.
It's pretty unapologetically consequentialist.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like pure utilitarianism, but it's something along those lines. But yeah, I have no doubt, just from listening to Sam Harris talk, that he would be totally willing to throw out sections of the Constitution, you know, at will, for the sake of promoting well-being. But the problem with that, and we've talked about this in several past episodes, the problem with everything consequentialist is that it's so hard to predict consequences.
Yep.
And this is like, because it's hard to predict consequences, we have to trust in something. Like, we have to pick a system and go with it.
Yeah.
And trust that the consequences are going to be, if not as good as they could possibly be, then good enough.
Right.
Right. And like, you know, like I said before, I don't doubt that someone somewhere could come up with a better system than the Constitution.
Right.
But like you said, whatever system that would be, we would have to, you know, people would have to care about it. We would have to stick to it and abide by it. And if we don't, then there's no point in having it. And that's kind of where we're at with the Constitution right now.
Right.
You know, people are willing to throw out parts of it for consequentialist reasons. But it's like a system like the Constitution is almost like an overarching consequentialist thing. I'm not wording this very well. What I'm trying to say is that the consequentialism is that if we have this system and we abide by it as a system, and we don't just ignore parts of it we don't like based on immediate consequences, then the overall long-term consequences for society is going to be a net positive.
Right.
But that depends on people caring about it and abiding by it.
Right. Well, the only beef, I have no beef with Sam Harris's utopia. This, I mean, I do, but whatever. His methodology is fine as far as we can make that world he wants. The parts of the Constitution he finds useful, he can keep that, and he can get rid of the parts he doesn't find useful. But we can do that with an amendment, do it the right way. But if he really cares about this well-being for all, there are definitely parts of the Constitution he does think are useful, like the First Amendment, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a free speech, that's just, I mean, that's a big part of everything he talks about, right? Or not everything, but a very common theme with him and these other intellectual dark web guys, right, is free speech. So if he truly finds free speech worthy of protecting, then how is he supposed to protect it without a constitution? If the Constitution itself is no longer enforceable, then that's what happens. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think it was John Adams or James Madison said, like, to take a single step beyond the text would be to take hold of like an infinite power, right? If you can take a single little tiny step past the text, what you're doing is saying this text it's not actually law. It's not enforceable. And that's absolutely true. And George Washington said something very similar. And he said that, basically that the Constitution is, it's obligatory upon all, right? Sacredly, or something like that. And unless it's changed by the whole people, right? And until then, it's obligatory upon all. And he said, even though we might have an idea, and I'm paraphrasing, that, and we can't change it by usurpation, because even though it might be he called it even though in this instance, it may be the vehicle of good, it has always been the vehicle by which free governments end, right? That, it's a good idea fairy. It's the consequentialism. It's, this is a good idea. I want the outcome, so let's ignore it for that. You can't do that without completely throwing the whole damn thing away. And it may not feel like that, but you're setting up. It may take a long time to throw the whole damn thing away. It may take hundreds of years, but you're admitting that it isn't actually enforceable. You know what I mean?
Going with to kind of go with what Sam Harris's view is, like, if you're willing to if you're willing to ignore parts of the Constitution that you don't think are in line with the well-being of the people, and you might even be right. Like, prohibition was a thing once. That was an amendment to the Constitution, and you might be right. Like, that was a bad amendment. But if you're willing to ignore that, but it was fixed in the right way.
Yep.
It was fixed with another amendment.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see something like that you disagree with and you think is a bad policy, and you're willing to ignore it without changing it according to the procedure laid out in the document, what's to stop somebody else who has completely fucked up morals from doing the same thing with something that is good?
Yeah, to the parts you do like. And that's exactly the thing. So if Sam Harris, I think if he really thought it through, if he does value free speech, he can't have it both ways.
It would become might makes right.
Right.
Because if then it becomes who is more capable of ignoring the Constitution.
Yeah. Exactly.
Who is more capable of enforcing which parts of the Constitution they think should be ignored.
Yeah. It's exactly tyranny is what we're describing. So that's why, like, if Sam Harris, he can't have it both ways, is what I'm saying. He can't just pick and choose. Nobody can, right? So that's why, like, he's not proposing we throw off the Constitution, but he certainly doesn't care about it unless it's useful. And that attitude is what leads to usurpation, and ultimately it means that even the parts you like aren't actually protected. It is a blank sheet of paper by construction if you do that. So, and I think, he's just not, I don't know. He hardly talks about structure of government or the Constitution. I mean, he's a smart guy. I doubt it's that he's thought a lot about it and come up with good reasons why we shouldn't care. It's probably just like he's not that interested. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so I don't know, but
which is fine. I mean, you don't have to be interested in that, but I think it would be better off if more smart people were.
Yeah, and I think if he can't have it both ways, and that would be if he thought it through. I'm sure he could see that. But anyway, so yeah, that's all I really have. I wanted to bring that up because it was this epiphany I had, and I'm going to start working on an episode for that. But I wanted to talk about it with you because I thought it was awesome.
Nice, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. All right, man. I guess we'll call it. All right.
Yeah. Unless there's anything else.
Nope.
What's on your mind?
Nope.
All right. If you like the show, there are many ways you can support it. You can talk about it on your own blog or podcast, you can share it on social media with your friends, or you can leave a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you happen to listen to it. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe to the channel and hit the thumbs up button if you like this video. Or if you really like us, you can support the show directly by going to patreon.com/philosophication. Thank you so much for your support.